Я включаю перевод тогда. Уважаемый Прабhu, если вам нужно будет что-то сказать, вы пишите, пожалуйста, в чат, потому что пока вы на канале переводчика, вы не сможете говорить ничего в общее аудио.
Okay, just 1 second. Okay. Hare Krishna. Is Brahmatirtha Prabhu here?
Yes, he is. Can't you see his effulgence?
No. Zoom doesn't give the...
I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I welcome His Holiness Hridayananda, Das Goswami, and Brahmatirtha Prabhu. And today's topic, which Hridayananda Maharaj will describe, is a very interesting and controversial topic. We are going to speak about the history which took place or which happened immediately after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. For 10 years, there was the period which is now called by ISKCON historians zonal Acharya period. And there is a lot of misunderstanding regarding this period and sometimes unjust interpretations of what happened. Actually, it was a very dynamic period in ISKCON's history. There was some severe problems during these 10 years. But the most important point is that ISKCON actually went through this period, and what we're going to hear now is the description of an eyewitness and not an eyewitness, not just, somebody who is standing by and watching what is going on, but the direct actor of all these sometimes very dramatic events. Hridayananda Maharaj will speak for 1 hour or maybe 1.5 hours, and then we can ask questions. But before we start, I will read a quote from Srila Prabhupada. That's a famous quote from the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 28th chapter. Puranjana becomes a woman in the next life. And in the purport, explaining this allegoric story about King Puranjana and his transformations, and the unknown friend which came to King Puranjana, Srila Prabhupada writes, whenever an Acharya comes, following the superior orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his representative, he establishes the principles of religion as enunciated in Bhagavad Gita. Religion means abiding by the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Religious principles begin from the time one surrenders to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is the Acharya's duty to spread a bona fide religious system and induce everyone to bow down before the Supreme Lord. One executes the religious principles by rendering devotional service, specifically the 9 items like hearing, chanting, and remembering. Unfortunately, when the Acharya disappears, rogues and non-devotees take advantage and immediately begin to introduce unauthorized principles in the name of so-called swamis, yogis, philanthropists, welfare workers, and so on. Actually, the human life is meant for executing the orders of the Supreme Lord as it is stated in the Bhagavad Gita. And Srila Prabhupada writes little later. This main business of human society is to think. The main business of human society is to think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead at all times, to become his devotees, to worship the Supreme Lord, and to bow down before him. The Acharya, the authorized representative of the Supreme Lord, establishes these principles, but when he disappears, things once again become disordered. The perfect disciples of the Acharya try to relieve the situation by sincerely following the instructions of the spiritual master. At the present moment, practically the entire world is afraid of rogues and non-devotees. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is started to save the world from irreligious principles. Everyone should cooperate with this movement in order to bring about actual peace and happiness in this world. The main point of this purport is that when the Acharya disappears, there will be difficulties. The difficulties can be expected, but we can overcome all the difficulties by strictly following the orders of the Acharya. And that's basically the main lesson which we can derive from this glorious, but at the same time very dramatic period of ISKCON's history. And now we want to hear Hridayananda Maharaj. He promised that he will have his historian hat on. And he will take off his polemical debater's hat. Passionately explain the history, the main, the main points or the main periods of this history. So please, Maharaj, you have the microphone, and I'm all listening.
I know, but you have the mute button. Anyway, so
I have the mute button, Maharaj.
Oh. So thank you very much. As I said several days ago, it's an honor for me to speak to the Russian devotees, especially Russian leaders. Russia is obviously one of the most important countries in the world, not only materially, but also in ISKCON, in Prabhupada's movement. So I want to take you back to that time and, as the saying goes, walk you through it so that you can hopefully understand what it was like to be in that situation. So in 1977, something dramatic happened in ISKCON, and that is that Prabhupada's health declined. And almost since I joined the movement, I mean, every year, couple of years, Prabhupada had some serious health problems. Sometimes we were told to chant, constantly for Prabhupada because he had other health problems. So the fact that his health was not excellent was something we had experienced before. But as 1977 continued after the Mayapur festival, it became clear that this was much more serious than previous health problems and that Prabhupada was critically ill. So Prabhupada then also began asking that we visit him. And so normally I only went to India once a year, and that was a bit of an austerity for me because I was coming from the most distant place on earth. If you're coming from Russia, it's basically like flying from New York to Mexico, which is not a big deal. But if you're coming from Latin America, in those days we had to fly to New York and then to Europe. And so altogether, with all the land travel and air travel, it would probably about like maybe 35 hours of travel to go to India. So the next important thing that happened was that I received a letter saying that there would be an adjustment in the initiation process. Before that time, GBCs, including myself, we would send letters to Prabhupada with recommendations, with a list of devotees to be initiated, because many people were joining. And Prabhupada, in my case, never questioned or asked anything about it. One second, I'm just going to close the window here because there's some noise outside. So I received a letter saying that in order to preserve Prabhupada's energy so that he could recover, instead of sending in the lists of initiates like I had done for several years, and of course Prabhupada's secretary would choose the names, which I personally saw that many times, where the secretary would come to Prabhupada and say, here are the initiates, here are the names. And unless there was something really silly about the name or ungrammatical, Prabhupada would approve. So I was told, I and others were told, that 11 of us now would serve as Ritwiks, which actually was a name that Tamal Krishnaswamy suggests, and in Sanskrit, it's actually not the right word, because Ritwik doesn't mean a proxy or a surrogate. So it's, just so you know quickly what the word Ritwik actually means in Sanskrit. Ritu in Sanskrit means a season, like summer, fall, winter. It means a season. And Ij in Sanskrit, according to a grammatical principle called samprasarana, is an abbreviation of the verbal root yaj, from which you get words like yagya, yajna, or sacrifice, yaga, and so on. So rituij literally means to sacrifice God, that light. Sorry, I'm in sunny California, so let me see if I can improve that. I'm sorry for all these interruptions. Let me see if I can. I'm blocking the sun as much as I can, but maybe that'll be better.
Yeah, it's much better.
So it's actually, I'm just humbly saying it's the sun. It's really my anyway. So the word ritwij or ritwik literally means sacrificing in season, and the reason for that is that the sacrifices found in the Vedas, the Rig Veda is basically a book of hymns that are chanted at the great Vedic sacrifices. And so the cycle, there's an annual cycle of sacrifices. They're done at specific times. Some sacrifices, of course, are not within the calendar, like let's say Ashwamedha or Rajasuya, because they're done only when there's a king of kings. But apart from these special sacrifices, you could say political sacrifices, the normal Vedic sacrifices they follow the agricultural calendar. So that, you find this in ancient cultures all around the world, in ancient Israel and in Greece and Rome, all around the world, there was a cycle of sacrifices that accompanied, because people live by agriculture. And so there was a sacrifice for planting the crops, for bringing rain, for harvesting, and so on. So because these sacrifices were seasonal, they were done at specific times of the year, a sort of a technician, someone who was an expert in how to do these sacrifices, was called a ritwik. In other words, someone who sacrifices at the right season. And they would sit there at the sacrifice, and because they were very technical, to do a sacrifice, these great state sacrifices, which were very expensive and can only really be done by a government. And so you had to have the equivalent of a PhD, of a doctorate, because they were very technical. There were many mantras. Everything had to be chanted perfectly. So really, you had to be a scholar in order to know exactly how to do the sacrifice. And So these people, these technicians, these technical experts who would sit there at the sacrifice, okay, now chant this mantra, now do this, now, they were called Ritviks. So it has nothing to, it's not a surrogate, it's not a proxy, but somehow Tamal Krishna suggested that name, and Prabhupada's health was very bad, so he didn't object to it. So anyway, so I was just told, okay, don't bother Prabhupada by sending letters with names, just, you find the names, because we were helping to find names anyway. So you just do the names and Prabhupada trusts you to initiate on his behalf. So, I did that. And of course, we were all hoping Prabhupada would recover. Then I received another letter several months later saying, after Prabhupada had left this world externally, saying that now I would be a guru. So a few things you have to understand about what it was like to be a Hare Krishna leader back in those days. First of all, there was no internet. I know those of you who are younger probably can't imagine how life went on without the internet. It's almost like, living without indoor plumbing or something. But anyway, and in South America, because South America, the countries were poor, so we didn't even have, most temples didn't have telephones, not to speak of internet, and mail could take a month to arrive. And then if someone answered, so if you were very, very lucky and you wrote a letter to somebody outside your country, you might get an answer in 6 weeks if you were very lucky, if things were really going well. So we were very isolated. And another thing related to that, which you may not understand about how the Hare Krishna movement operated back then, it was also very different than now, in the sense that now, for example, in Russia, there are many gurus who have disciples in Russia. There are many gurus that have disciples in India or America. And it's sort of a normal thing that, let's say, during the year, let's say a prominent place like Moscow, that many gurus will come, many sannyasis will visit and so on. And that didn't exist back then when Prabhupada was here. That didn't exist. In Latin America, for example, no other guru ever, well, there are no gurus except Prabhupada, but not only did other, let's say, GBCs or sannyasis generally not come there, but if they did come, or if they wanted to stay there and not just visit, they would only do so with the permission of the local person. And Prabhupada, I know sometimes devotees would write letters to Prabhupada and he would just send them to me. He would say, Hridayananda will answer your questions. Or when Prabhupada, the one time he visited South America, first he went to Mexico, which is not South America, it's Middle America. Then he came to Caracas, and the last class he gave in Latin America, the last thing he said was, he told everyone, just follow Hridayananda Goswami. And that was his last instruction. So that was the situation. So as a GBC, as a sannyasi, I was entirely responsible for that area. I was the leader of that area. And then, so when I was told I was going to be a guru, it was just one more duty. It's not like, oh, my life will never be the same. Well, in a sense that was true, but I continued as the GBC. I was a preacher. I wasn't a manager. I knew how to manage and the programs were successful, but basically I didn't manage any project. I didn't even get monthly reports. I just sort of knew what was going on, and my whole service, in a sense, was preaching. I would make sure the management was going nicely, but my whole life was preaching. And that's what Prabhupada emphasized, that the GBC, first of all, is a preacher. So before I got a letter saying that now you're going to be a guru. And it will be confirmed in Mayapur, which because Prabhupada left this world, I think, on November 17th. And so the GBC meeting was just 3 months after Prabhupada passed away. I mean, within 3 months, we were meeting in Mayapur to confirm that I was supposed to be a guru. Krishna knows very well, Krishna knows that before this happened, I had never once in my life thought of being a guru. It was not something I ever, not even once in my life, did I ever think of being a guru. And I had no real, I had no real desire. I'd never thought about it. I never thought about being a GBC. Prabhupada called me to his room and told me or asked me to be GBC for Latin America. So I didn't volunteer to be a GBC, and I didn't volunteer to become a guru. And so we went to Mayapur, and the GBC voted because Prabhupada said that GBC is the ultimate managing authority. So, and we took that very seriously. So the GBC voted that I should serve as a guru. So after that meeting, I had doubts because I didn't feel qualified. I was 29 years old. 29 years old. I had been in the Hare Krishna movement 8 years. 8 years. Nowadays, if you're in the movement 8 years, you know, you can hardly take around the Giwix, you know, in the Arctic. So, but I was in the movement 8 years, and I was 29 years old. And a godbrother of mine, who was a senior godbrother, he remembers that when I flew back to New York, we were staying in the Brooklyn Temple, you know, trying to recover from the trip. And I went to his room one night and said, I don't think I'm ready to do this. And he preached to me. He preached to me, you have to do it, it's your duty. So then I spoke to the leaders in my zone in Latin America, and I told them, what if I just take a year off? What if I just, you know, for a year, maybe I'll chant like 1,000 rounds a day or something. And maybe, you know, maybe I can become Krishna conscious or something. So everyone around me, I told them, maybe, you know, can I have some time? I don't think I really want to do this now. And my godbrothers insisted that I do it. Of course, the mythological history of ISKCON is that these gurus kind of, you know, grab power. Some of them did. Some of them were ambitious, and they're no longer with us in ISKCON. So, but that was my case. Then, so Balavanta, my godbrother Balavanta, requested me to be the guru in his zone, which was the Southeast United States. It was Houston, New Orleans, Atlanta, Gainesville, and Miami. So he asked me to be the guru in his zone. So when I went to Houston, there was a temple president, Lakshmi Narayan, who was about literally twice as big as me. Brahmatirtha remembers how big Lakshmi Narayan was. And so I went into the temple room, and there was this big Vyasasana. And I thought, oh my God. Or actually, back then I probably would have said Hare Krishna. But anyway, there was this big Vyasasana. And I thought, I'm not going to sit on that. And then the temple president, who, like I said, was about twice as big as me, but generally nonviolent. But anyway, he was really big. He actually took me physically and walked me over and practically put me on the seat. And the same thing happened in the next temple, which was New Orleans. Somehow or other, I had a zone with all these larger than average temple presidents. So in New Orleans, temple president was Brikodara, that Bhaktivedanta may remember, Brikodara. And Same thing, big guy. Before he joined the movement, he was a professional boxer. I mean, not that he was threatening me, but they had this big Vyasasana, and he took me over and put me on the seat. So the mythological history is that, you know, we all were just ambitious and had these big seats built for ourselves, which in my case, I never instructed anyone, build a big seat for me. So another historical fact is that exactly how to worship the guru, for example, should a disciple of Prabhupada have a Vyasasana in the temple, which in ISKCON now would be like killing a cow or something. But, you know, back then, no one knew, should we have a Vyasasana in the temple, or should it be somewhere else, or how big should it be? Those are details. There are no Shastric injunctions. There's no Shastric injunction about that. It's just a detail. Now, there are a couple other facts here that I always joke that my godbrother, Radhanath Swami, of course, an excellent devotee, but he wrote that book, The Journey Home. I always say that I never could have written that book, you know, The Journey Home, because when I was young, I had absolutely no interest in Indian gurus. Actually, even Prabhupada had no interest in Indian gurus, and his godbrother had to drag him to see Bhaktisiddhanta, but I had no interest at all. I had no interest particularly in India. I was interested in spiritual knowledge, and when I read Prabhupada's abridged Bhagavad Gita, it changed my life. So I was interested in Krishna, but not India. I just had no interest. And so in terms of how do I do this? How should I, in terms of external ceremony, in terms of worship and all that, how do I do this? Now, in my case, there was only one guru that I ever took seriously in my life, and that was Prabhupada. As far as let's say gurus that weren't even Vaishnavas, I mean, to me, they were just, you know, like Prabhupada said, they were just bogus. They were just people who were giving false or incomplete knowledge. So I certainly wasn't going to follow them. And as far as the Gaudiya-math, someone could say, well, why don't you just do what they do in the Gaudiya-math? There were two problems with that. Number one, the Gaudiya-math self-destructed. So whatever they did, they destroyed themselves. They destroyed their institution. So clearly the Gaudiya-math, plus another point is that Prabhupada had always told me not to associate with the Gaudiya-math. Even when I was at GBC, Prabhupada told me, do not associate with them. Because sometimes they would criticize Prabhupada, sometimes they would say strange things. So anyway, there are many stories about that where Prabhupada personally instructed me because of different things that happened. So the only bona fide guru that I took seriously, that I felt I could follow, was Prabhupada. And Prabhupada constantly told us, do not change anything, just do what I'm doing. So here I am, 29 years old, 8 years in the movement, and no, I knew very little and was not at all interested in exactly how they do things in India. And no instructions from Prabhupada, no details, no Shastric instructions. What does Shastra say about the details of being guru? Very little. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Acharya Upasanam, one should honor a spiritual teacher or worship as, how do you do that? What are the so there was nothing. So therefore, I and many other young devotees that were gurus decided that we'll do what Prabhupada did, but obviously on a lesser scale. I mean, I knew that I cannot sit on the same level as Prabhupada, because one time I was with Prabhupada in New Vrindavan in 1972, and he was getting a massage, and I just sat down there to be with him. But, you know, New Vrindavan, there's very little level land in New Vrindavan. It's like, so even there in the land around the house where Prabhupada was staying, it was a little bit inclined like that. And so I wasn't thinking, I just sat down, and then I was sitting a little bit higher than Prabhupada. So Prabhupada said to me, you should not sit higher than the Guru. So of course I immediately went lower, but again, so I knew, I mean, it was obvious, you'd have to be a complete idiot not to understand that you can't sit at a level.
But I have a question. Can I interrupt you? We know that before Prabhupada's departure, like in May of 77 or during summer, GBC would inquire Srila Prabhupada, in particular Tamal Krishna Maharaj, about how the succession or initiating process will happen or will take place after his departure. My first question is whether you were aware of these conversations with the GBC, as the GBC. Did they inform you about this? And if yes, was there any discussion between the GBCs? What does it mean in practical sense? Because now you say that it was like a very unexpected event, and you were not really prepared, and nobody was prepared. So since Prabhupada clearly said they will be disciples of my disciples, and people will...
Oops, you're muted now. Oh, somehow you got muted.
Sorry. Yeah, Prabhupada would say that you will be disciple of my disciples, so on and so forth. So that's the question which I have.
Okay, first of all, it gets back to the point I made before, communication. Communication between India and South America. I mean, it might literally, if they would have sent me, you know, because we didn't use telephones, there was no internet. So if they would have mailed me copies of that conversation, it probably would have got there a few months later. And also, and they didn't send, because it wasn't transcribed. Because in those days, there's another thing you have to remember. In those days, Prabhupada's books were transcribed. He would dictate the Bhagavatam, that would be transcribed. It was not the system in ISKCON then to transcribe conversations. That happened later. They would be recorded, and fortunately, most of the recordings were kept, but they weren't transcribed. And also, they weren't sent out as cassettes. Actually, I don't even know if we had cassettes back then. So the technology was very simple, and so the answer is no. The answer is no, because the conversations weren't transcribed then. And basically, when we went to Mayapur, then we'd find out these things. So no, I didn't know. And even if I had known that, it wouldn't change anything, because to me, if you have this much common sense, it's obvious what Prabhupada is saying, that when I leave, that these gurus will be regular gurus. They will have their disciples. But we also didn't think Prabhupada would leave. That was another thing. The conversations were not transcribed, and therefore, and they didn't send us, a tape with a recording, and we didn't think Prabhupada was really going to leave. So no, I didn't know about it. And then when I don't even remember when I eventually found out, but when I did find out, it just seemed like, yeah, it's common sense. This is the eternal Vedic system. Krishna says in the Gita, I spoke to Vivaswan, Vivaswan spoke to Manu. So there is no such thing as a Ritwik guru. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in the Vedas. It's not part of Vedic culture.
I have another question in this regard.
Yes.
You said that you received this letter about the changing of the initiation process,
Right.
letter signed by Prabhupada, this famous letter which names 11 people. Was it taken at that time as some sort of succession, that Prabhupada is really naming his successors, or it was just the prominent GBCs who were doing the regular duties of, sending the letters of new initiates? How was it perceived by you and by all the other devotees in the movement?
Again, I don't know how all the other devotees perceived it because we didn't communicate in those days. We would meet each other at Mayapur. And for example, what was Hridayananda thinking? Well, we know what he was thinking. What was Hansaduta thinking? What was Jayatirtha thinking? Or Tamal Krishna? I don't know because we didn't communicate. We didn't write letters to each other. There was no internet. We didn't make phone calls. So
your perception was just that this is just a little technical change in the process of initiation.
Well, no, that's going to the other extreme. I thought it's serious. I understood that this is serious, that Prabhupada is trusting me to do this, but Prabhupada was already trusting me. He was already trusting me to take care of, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of his disciples. Prabhupada trusted me and asked me to represent him in, a big part of the planet, half of the Western Hemisphere. So, I was already conscious, very conscious, every day, practically every minute. That was my life, that consciousness that Prabhupada is trusting me with a very important responsibility, and I have to represent him. So that was my normal consciousness. It's not that I was just, working in the kitchen in ISKCON Guadalajara, and now suddenly I'm going to, no, I was already doing that. And when I would recommend people for this, I'd recommended hundreds and hundreds of people to Prabhupada, and that was very serious. We took that very seriously. So it was another serious duty. And when I read the transcripts, when eventually, a couple of years later, I did read the transcripts of what Prabhupada said, say in July, it was obvious what he meant. It was obvious what he meant. And it was just common sense. Prabhupada basically instituted in ISKCON the eternal Vedic system, which Krishna describes in Bhagavad Gita called Parampara. And so everything to me just seemed like normal and common sense. And when I heard objections to this system, I thought these people are really foolish.
One more question in this regard. You said that you were initially very hesitant to start initiating process, even after you were officially inaugurated or authorized by the GBC in Mayapur. But I also heard that some people, even before Mayapur meetings, started initiating among those who were
Yes.
as the full-fledged gurus.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very important point, that there were 11 people, but they were very different people. We were not just, like the three musketeers. Well, even the three musketeers were actually very different individually, but if you read the book. But we were very different, very, very different. We came from different backgrounds. We had different understandings of, about life. And we had, and yes, some people were very ambitious. And they're not with us now. So yes, we were very, very different. I can't say that I was, completely pure, some great devotee, but I understood that I'm a servant of Prabhupada. And like I said, I becoming a guru was something I never thought about in my life until I was told to be a guru, because actually, I'll tell you one reason why. Because exactly at the time that I was told to be a guru. Personally, I was going in a very different direction in my own personal life, because I was, to use the ISKCON word, burned out with managing. I was exhausted. My health was bad. How do they say burned out in Russian?
Vision.
Vision. So actually, my dream at that time was to go back to college. I wanted to be a scholar. And I had a direct instruction from Prabhupada to get an excellent higher education. When I joined the movement in 1969, the first letter I wrote to Prabhupada as just a week after or less, probably a few days after I moved into the temple, I wrote Prabhupada a letter asking if I should stay in school. I was at Berkeley, the university in Berkeley. So should I stay in school, or should I leave and just, sell in, do the regular temple activities? And Prabhupada wrote to me. It was the first personal instruction I ever received from Prabhupada, and it became my life mission. Prabhupada said, stay in school. You need to have a good education so that you can preach to other educated people. So by 1977, just traveling constantly around Latin America and going to India 4 times that year, and then just constantly traveling and so much stress. So my health actually was very bad. And what I really wanted to do, my enthusiasm, was not to be a guru. It was to be a scholar. And so therefore, that's another reason I wasn't eager to be a guru, because I didn't want to travel like before. I really just wanted to go back to the university for Krishna. I wanted to do it as service, but I wanted to be a scholar for Krishna.
So please continue where you stopped. You said that there were no other example besides Prabhupada in front of anyone's eyes, and you naturally started following Prabhupada on a lower scale, but still more or less.
Yes. Because that's what guru was. There had only been one guru in ISKCON, and Prabhupada is the founder Acharya. So when we accepted a certain level of honor, the word puja can be worship, but it also just means honor. Like, for example, in Sanskrit, if you were saying honor your father and mother, that would be puja. So I didn't know what else to do. I had absolutely no idea how to be a guru except by following Prabhupada, who was the founder, Acharya. And I had absolutely no other idea. I wasn't going to invent something. Prabhupada would get very angry if you just invented something. And so, and in doing things the way it was done at that time, it did not violate any Shastric injunction. It did not violate any direct instruction from Prabhupada. It was not sinful. And so therefore, to say that it was wrong or it was bad, how can something be wrong and bad if it's not forbidden by Shastra and it doesn't go against Prabhupada's instructions? It turned out to be impractical for the reason that, many of the gurus were it was too much for them. And then they fell down from that position, but it wasn't against Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra.
One more question. We all know that in this initial period, some of the GBC members went over to Prabhupada's godbrother, very prominent and very scholarly, and took advice from him. When did it take place? Did it take place during Mayapur meetings?
First of all, that guru was certainly, in one sense, learned, not a scholar. Not in the academic sense. Prabhupada had said that when I'm gone, if you have some questions, and he was really talking about detailed things, like how to do the funeral ceremony, or just technically said, you can consult with, some of my godbrothers. And Sridhar Swami was a friend of ISKCON. He sincerely wanted to help ISKCON. He wasn't a bad person, but he didn't really understand some things that Bhaktisiddhanta taught about practical matters. And the authority for my statement is Prabhupada himself. Prabhupada said this, more than once. We have it in writing. Prabhupada wrote a letter. He says these things. And so Sridhar Swami was very much, you could say, attached to or believed in very strongly, not the GBC system that Prabhupada gave, but the Acharya system, in which after one Acharya goes, then you choose another Acharya, which is obviously not at all what Prabhupada wanted. In fact, Prabhupada used to teach all the time that this wrong decision destroyed the Gaudiya-sampradaya as a unified institution, and that Bhaktisiddhanta wanted his disciples to work together to form a group like the GBC, but without authority, they did something else. And one of the leaders of that something else was Sridhar Swami. And so the GBC sent a small group. I think it was Satsarupa, it was maybe Hridayananda, Bhagavan, I can't remember, but I know Satsarupa went. And so as we always would say in those days, to go to cross the river, to Navadvip, to Sridhar's ashram. And so they went there and they interviewed him, and we have a transcription of that. We have a recording and a transcription. And Sridhar Swami explicitly, directly says that the guru is above the GBC. And this is, you have to understand something else. For Sridhar Swami, it seems, the fact that the Gaudiya-sampradaya disintegrated was not a problem. That was a good thing. Because that way, every guru could have his own institution. So as far as I know, Sridhar Swami never stated that the disintegration, the collapse of the Gaudiya-sampradaya as a united institution, Sridhar Swami never said that was a problem or that was bad. He probably thought that was nice. Whoops, trying to reduce the light. What can you do? If someone's self-effulgent, it's hard to, that was a joke. So you can read the transcript. It's very clear. And obviously people who are loyal to Sridhar Swami try to say, no, he didn't really say that, but he did say it, and he said it over and over again. And he said it in very simple, clear English. And you can say the sun is the moon and up is down, but that's not the fact. So now,
so
how
the GBC decision was based on his advice, basically.
Well, to a limited extent. That's another point that needs to be discussed. ISKCON, the GBC, never adopted the idea that the gurus are above the GBC, and I can prove that by giving historical examples, which I will do now. But the one thing that did influence us, because I remember sitting in the room and Satsarupa, he was always like the secretary. So Satsarupa took notes, and then he read his notes. So he told us, this is what Sridhar Swami said. And of course, at that point, we didn't have a transcription. But he said that every guru should have a place where the disciple can have the guru exclusively. In other words, Sridhar Swami believed that in order for a guru to have the necessary conditions to train a disciple, so that there should be some place where that there's just that guru. And actually, Prabhupada said, I read in a letter, Prabhupada said that one good spiritual leader, Krishna conscious person is enough to save a particular area. But in any case, also because ISKCON already operated that way. And so in those days, for the GBC to say, okay, every guru can go everywhere, especially when the only guru we'd ever known, most of us, was Prabhupada. And for us, the guru was this, powerful figure with great authority. And so to have all these leaders, all these powerful leaders just going everywhere was just chaos. It would have been chaos. And ISKCON, like I said, didn't operate that way. But apart from that, the GBC also formed an Acharya Board. Now, what was the Acharya Board? The idea was that for expanding the number of gurus or making new gurus, that basically it was a GBC committee. It was never above the GBC. It never replaced the GBC. It's just like there is a deity worship committee, or there's a fundraising committee, and so on. And so the idea was that because the gurus are the ones who are going to have all this experience, they are the most qualified persons to decide, who should be a guru or to make new gurus. To me, it's just like saying that pujaris should decide the rules for deity worship in ISKCON, because they're the ones who are actually doing it. Or to say that, people who are doing food for life programs should decide ISKCON's policies about food for life. So to me, that's what it was. Now, in fact, this Acharya Board, as it was called, never really did anything. And I'll explain why. Because that Acharya Board, I believe, was, and so again, people are not trained historians and they don't really care so much about the facts, a lot of people, they just like to tell stories. And so ISKCON has this mythological history. The fact is that for the first year, the gurus began with GBC authority. So whether Prabhupada meant this or that, the fact is Prabhupada gave ultimate managing authority for all of ISKCON to the GBC, and the GBC voted that these people should be gurus. So did Prabhupada want them to be gurus? Yes, obviously. But in any case, were they bona fide anyway? Yes, because the GBC voted that. And that was the ultimate authority that Prabhupada left. But so the first year, let's say 1979, we didn't make new gurus for the simple reason that we were still trying to understand that. And it seemed intelligent, and I think it was intelligent, not to expand something that you are still learning about. You're still trying to understand it. So first understand it, make sure you get it right, and then you can expand it. And so in 1980, but I would say probably by the end of 1979, before anyone had ever thought of making new gurus, because it was all so new, there was a problem. The problem was that some gurus clearly were behaving in strange ways. And this was a real shock because, as Brahmatirtha always points out, there's a grieving period. Prabhupada left this world. And so everyone was just sort of taking shelter of, it's just like if your father leaves and your mother is not there, then, you take shelter of your older brothers. That's just natural human behavior. So in 1970, the three gurus, to be honest, were number one, Hansadutta. Hansadutta was, who's passed away. Apparently he is becoming addicted to cough medicine with alcohol in it. And he also was actually, we didn't know that then, but he was falling down with some of his female disciples. And he basically was creating a neo-Nazi cult within ISKCON. For example, the devotees had bought some land about, I don't know, maybe an hour north of Berkeley, or an hour and a half north of Berkeley. And they were stocking weapons, like these sort of, like these survivalists. They were, military grade weapons. And the government went in there. I mean, the government became very concerned. When I went to, I know all these things because in 1980, when Hansaduta was suspended from his zone, I was sent to Berkeley as the temporary GBC. So I was there. And there was a little guest reception room in the Berkeley Temple with a table. And on the table was Mein Kampf, Hitler's little autobiography in which he, describes his plans to spread Krishna consciousness. So, so you have Mein Kampf in the guest area. They're buying all these military weapons. Hansaduta is, so it was a problem. Then there was Jayatirtha. Poor Jayatirtha. Anyway, he who before Jayatirtha joined the Hare Krishna movement, he was one of the leaders in the movement of Timothy Leary, who started the whole LSD movement. Mm-hmm. And so Jayatirtha, as a guru, big guru and the big seat in the Bhaktivedanta manor, he had gone back to LSD. And he would sit on the Vyasasana in Bhaktivedanta manor, this like beautiful temple with this, very opulent seats and everything. And he would have a disciple come to him. Jayatirtha liked nice things. He was like, he had very high taste in terms of clothes, there would be a little silver dish, and on it was a little silver pitcher, to pour things. And then he would take a silver spoon, and he would take so everyone thought it was some kind of medicine. It was actually LSD. It was pure LSD. And so that was I guess you could say, the psychedelic period of the Hare Krishna movement. And so when he took this LSD, he would go crazy. He would start shrieking, screaming, and crying, and rolling off the Vyasasana. So some people thought he's gone crazy, and other people thought, no, he's the first Prabhupada disciple who's experiencing the ecstasies described in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He's the first one that is actually experiencing all these ecstatic symptoms. And so then someone sent to the GBC, I didn't hear it until the meeting, but someone was recording, taping, and Jayatirtha he was like a madman, just like shrieking and saying, please believe me. And he was crazy with LSD. And then the third one was Tamal Krishna. Tamal Krishna was not breaking the principles. He was not doing anything like that, but he was heavy. So when he became a guru, first he was in Mumbai, and he was very heavy, he did tell all his god brothers and god sisters that now I'm your guru and everything. And so they immediately rebelled. So he wanted to establish himself as practically like the next Acharya in his guru zone. And so the devotees in Bombay, because in those days, the Bombay devotees, they were very experienced senior devotees that Prabhupada had there. And so they rejected him as the next Acharya of Bombay, and they, started writing to the GBC. It became a big scandal. And but again, Tamal Krishna didn't break any principles, but that was the problem. So after Mayapur, just about a month after the Mayapur meeting,
In 1980.
1980. And again, this is just 2 years after we began to be gurus and before there are new gurus. So there was an emergency GBC meeting, which took place in my house. There was an emergency GBC meeting and in Los Angeles, and these 3 gurus were disciplined. So here are the important points here. Number 1, when you're trying to understand what is the legal system in a country, what is the practical legal system in any country, you have to look at actual court cases. You know, something may be written in this or that old book, but what actually happens in the court? What do the judges say? And so if you want to understand who actually had power in ISKCON, then that meeting in 1980 absolutely clarified it, that the power was in the hands of the GBC. And there was not one GBC member, not one, who argued at that meeting that the GBC cannot discipline a guru. No one said that. The GBC unanimously understood that the guru is under the GBC because that's Prabhupada's system. So the idea that the Acharyas or the Acharya Board is basically nonsense. Also because the Acharya Board never really met, never really did anything of any significance whatsoever, because we weren't making new gurus. And the Acharya Board was supposed to be a sort of an expert committee of the GBC to use their experience to judge who was qualified. But they never did that because before 1980, there were no other gurus. So there was no reason to meet. And, or if they did meet, it might have been for little details. I don't know. And also, once this happened, where these 3 gurus were seen to have deviated, again, Tamal Krishna much less than the others, no one at that point trusted gurus to be the leaders of ISKCON. In other words, they were trusted to be gurus, but they weren't going to make final decisions for the Hare Krishna movement. So any, say like aura, any like mystic idea that these gurus know more than everybody else, that was finished in 1980. That was finished. And it became very obvious that the ultimate security for ISKCON's ultimate trust had to be in the GBC. So the idea of sort of a rogue or renegade Acharya Board is just, again, it's part of the mythological history.
So besides this dark side, can you describe what was the mood still? And also, it's very interesting what you said is that after this first problems with these 3 prominent gurus, devotees kind of were more realistic about them. So how was it taken by the rank and file devotees? Was it a shock, or they just continued as if nothing happened? So, you know, first, what was the mood? What was the mood during this period, initial period after Prabhupada's disappearance?
Right.
And,
first of all, it was, again, it wasn't like nowadays. It's not like you go on the internet and you find 10,000 different opinions, you know, many of them coming from barbarians with tilak. You know, it wasn't like that then. And so as far as the rank and file devotees, I think, at least my disciples, what they would tell me, Well, actually, they reacted differently. People are different. I would say most of the disciples were grateful that I wasn't crazy. They were just like, thank God our guru didn't do these things. I would say disciples who had some envy, they took advantage of this. And I would say especially there were people, I think not very wise, but actually it was these fall downs that first began the idea that in the Gaudiya Math, they have much older gurus and they're senior, they're not going to fall down. They've been in the Hare Krishna movement, 50 years. And so some people, I mean, now that I'm thinking, yes, there was a group of devotees, not the majority, who began to think that you can't trust Western gurus. We should go to the Gaudiya Math. And of course, these people were either ignorant or they were just consciously ignoring everything Prabhupada said. It's exactly what Prabhupada did not want. And so all the problems in the Gaudiya Math, of course, were just ignored. And to me, it's like if a devotee is elderly and has an Indian body, then he must be a pure devotee. And I mean, because it was so obvious that a number of these Gaudiya Math gurus, I don't want to offend them, but in many ways, they were different from Prabhupada. In many ways, they disagreed with Prabhupada. In many ways, they had participated in activities that destroyed the Gaudiya Math as a unified institution. All that didn't matter to these people. They're elderly, they have Indian bodies, and therefore they're pure devotees. And so, yeah, that's what, and also because of these disciplined gurus, actually two of the three gurus that were disciplined went to Sridhar Swami, Jayatirtha and Hansaduta. So, that became a problem.
They were seeking his support.
Well, yeah, they wanted to use him as a weapon against ISKCON. I don't blame Sridhar Swami, but they used him like, okay, we were humiliated, but now we're better than you because everyone in ISKCON has these unqualified Western gurus, as if there were a bodily qualification to be a guru. It's very much bodily consciousness. It's basically racism. It's basically mundane racism that a bona fide guru has to have a certain kind of body. So in my view, it was pretty stupid. But then these people wanted to attack. They wanted revenge. Jayatirtha and Hansaduta, absolutely, because I knew them very well. They wanted revenge. And so they were going to use Sridhar Swami against his own real wishes as a weapon to attack ISKCON. And then later, of course, you get a case of Narayan Maharaj, who personally wanted to attack ISKCON and get revenge. That's a different story.
Yeah, I have another question. Can you describe how you felt after Prabhupada? Obviously, there was sort of empowerment by Prabhupada's letter and by GBC approval. What I know that there was a huge boost of enthusiasm and among the preachers in ISKCON or leading devotees in ISKCON, and partially it was because they kind of felt the empowerment, and this empowerment which they felt helped them to do something tremendous. And so I want to you to say a few words about this bright side of the spirit, because we
yes.
always think or hear about this dark
No,
side.
actually, my zone, which at that time was Brazil, and then I also began to serve as a guru in most of Latin America. My zone tripled in size. It was a real Hare Krishna explosion. And we made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of devotees, almost like Russia. You know, we made so many devotees. We bought farms. We were selling Prabhupada huge numbers, millions of Prabhupada's books. We established one of the best gurukulas in the world. We opened temples almost in every major city in the country. And so, yeah, it was the best time in the history of Brazil. Of course, you know, the credit goes to Prabhupada and Krishna. I was just following them, but yeah, it was very successful. Devotees were inspired. They were willing to sacrifice sense gratification to serve the mission. It was a very inspired, unselfish, expansive period, at least in my area.
What was happening in other areas of his?
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah, in many areas, actually. In many areas, the movement was doing very well. It was growing. The movement was growing. And then, yes, then when some gurus fell down, it kind of went to the other extreme. And people, when they had that guru reform movement, I remember, I mean, clearly something had to be done, but I kept telling these people, leaders of this reform, I kept telling them, you're going to cause a lot of damage. You're not doing this the right way because it's too passionate. It's too much friends and enemies. It's self-righteous instead of righteous. Not everyone, I mean, some people, but, and it happened. What I predicted would happen did happen. And ISKCON in the West has still not recovered. It's still not recovered.
Can you elaborate a little bit why, what exactly was wrong? You know, they were observing that something goes not in the right way and they wanted to correct it. And
I'll give you an example. When so many gurus fell down and it became obvious we have to change the system. Again, my zone was going very well, but so they formed this committee of 50 senior devotees. You remember that?
I was in my innocent years of Krishna consciousness at that time.
Yeah. So they formed a committee of 50 senior devotees. I call it the Gang of 50. They formed this committee to, to reform ISKCON and to decide, because there was a question, these people who had been zonal acharyas, can they still be gurus? As if I had broken some Vedic principle or broken some, or disobeyed some order of Prabhupada. So first of all, they developed this idea that just to be one of the big ISKCON gurus is already somehow offensive. We were all bad. It was a little crazy. So I'll give you two examples, or several examples from my role as GVC and trustees. So what they did is, it was sort of like the French Revolution in this, without the guillotine, in the sense that they would call the gurus one by one into this room in Mayapur, and they had all these, these 50 people, and they would ask them questions. And so some of the gurus, actually a lot of them, just told the committee exactly what they wanted to hear, which wasn't what they really believed, but they just said what they knew the committee wanted to hear. So the committee was so naive, they said, oh, okay, you're good, you can be a guru. And then Harikesh threatened them because he had a very big zone, powerful zone. And when he threatened them, they approved him just because they were afraid of what he might do. In my case, I didn't threaten the committee, and I didn't just flatter them and say a bunch of false things because I knew they wanted to hear it. I told the truth. I said that some things were good and some things were bad. And so because I dared to say that some things were good, they decided I shouldn't be a guru. Of course, after Harikesh, they changed that because they saw it was too dangerous. But also in terms of, then they had Jayadvaita Swami came up with this little, this little clever thing. What was it? The 3 R's. It was like recognize, repent, and reform. Like that was a little formula for us, that we should feel terribly guilty about all the bad things we'd done, like spreading the movement. Anyway, so what happened was there was one sannyasi in ISKCON. His name was Krishna Balaram Swami. He was actually from Vrindavan, and he was a sahaja. I mean, a real sahaja. He was having, as a sannyasi, he was having affairs with a number of women, sexual affairs with women, and left ISKCON and became an enemy of ISKCON. So he had been in my zone in Miami, and he told the committee that I was, all these bad things about me, which weren't true. So there was no fact checking. There was no attempt to hear the other side. There was no justice. There was no proper process where, okay, here's an accusation. Where's the evidence? Are there witnesses on the other side? In other words, there was nothing like justice. Nothing. It was like the worst banana republic dictatorship. So based on the testimony of someone who was actually a sahaja and then became an enemy of ISKCON, and without interviewing one person, like Brahmatirtha, for example, who was very, very qualified to give the other side. He knew everything. Brahmatirtha, as Rameshwar used to say, was like my clone, and so, I mean, Brahmatirtha knew everything. He wasn't interviewed. And so in other words, it was just a complete absurdity, nothing like justice. If anyone had something bad to say, it was true. And if anyone had something good to say, they didn't want to hear it. And so another absurdity was that they had one rectification for everyone. That is, all these fallen gurus should go on padayatra. Because one of the things that this sahaja, so-called sannyasi told them was that I was really into opulence. I lived in a, manufactured home that Brahmatirtha kindly bought for me, which in America is lower middle class. Anyway, so they said I was too attached to opulence. So therefore, without any investigation, they just knew that I was too attached to opulence. So to purify me, I should go on padayatra. So I thought, okay, this is silly, but whatever, for Prabhupada, I'll make a show of cooperating. So at that point, the Rath Yatra in India was in the city of Meerut, which is northeast, about 2 hours northeast of Delhi, and is very close to Hastinapur, where Hastinapur was. So I went there, and it was ecstatic. Actually, it was incredibly. They're having this like what they call Shobha Yatra. It's sort of like Rath Yatra, but it's not the Jagannath festival. They do this big fest, and it was very ecstatic. So I went there. The devotees were worshiping me more than in my zone. more than in my zone. And then the devotee said, okay, this is where you will stay, because I didn't know anything about India, you know, it's like, just tell me what to do. So they put me in a marble palace. They put me in a marble palace that belonged to a very rich life member. And I woke up early in the morning, you know, chant my rounds. I was walking on the veranda to chant my rounds. And the wife of the owner of the house, who was an attractive lady and not that old, and she was just walking around in her, what do you call it? Bathrobe, you know, brushing her long hair and, you know, greeting me. And I thought, this is too austere. You know, marble palace, lady walking around in a bathrobe, brushing her hair. This is too much austerity for me. So I left. I went back to my zone. But that was the Committee of 50. Another point, BBT. And this is really what changed, I would say forever, my attitude about ISKCON, I have to say. I mean, I never went back to what I was after that. So my life and soul was the BBT. When Prabhupada ordered me, I didn't volunteer. Prabhupada asked me to be the GBC BBT trustee for Spanish and Portuguese. Actually, Rameshwar asked Prabhupada if I could do it, and he agreed. And so that was my life, because Prabhupada said, you know, the books, you know, when Prabhupada said the books are the heart of ISKCON, and devotee said, Prabhupada, you are the heart of ISKCON. Prabhupada said, this is my heart. So ever since I was young, I mean, distributing Prabhupada's books was the center of my life, really. And within a couple of years of taking over Latin America, I'd say within 2 years, the Spanish BBT was the most successful foreign language BBT in the world. Because the English BBT was gigantic. But among all the other foreign language BBTs, I built up, or Krishna empowered me within a year or two to build the most successful foreign language BBT in the world. And I trained, and my zone, Latin America, was the world champion in book distribution. Radha Damodar always won, and we were the first ones. And so Prabhupada really loved that. So, and then I took on the task of finishing Prabhupada's Bhagavatam. It's interesting because I actually did all the purports and all the final translations of the Bhagavatam, except for the last 10 chapters of the 10th canto, which I asked Gopi Pranadhana to do. It's kind of to honor his contribution. Otherwise, I did all of the purports and did all the final translations. And yet the BBT took my name off the book. That was also part of the reform. And just said, oh, it was done by a group of people, which is, and it's true, Gopi Pranadhana made an invaluable contribution. And of course, Dravida was the editor, but when did Prabhupada ever put the editor's name on his books? Prabhupada also had Sanskrit editors that would correct the translations. He didn't put their names on the books either. Obviously Gopi was my godbrother, and he was more than just a Sanskrit editor. He made an invaluable contribution. But still, so then the BBT admitted that the reason they took my name off the book as the author is because I might fall down. And if I fell down, it would be too much trouble to have someone else translate the books. So they would just tell this little lie and say, and then of course, because there was so much this attitude against the gurus, then the popular ISKCON story was that Gopi Pranadhana really did everything and I just stole the credit. So, and of course, Brahmatirtha knows actually more of the details than me because he was managing everything. So then, in I think it was 1980, maybe 87, when they had the Gang of 50, the Committee of 50, they also voted that I should resign from the BBT. I should resign from the BBT. The reason given was that I was not really making a contribution to the BBT. And this was just shortly after I completed the Bhagavatam. So I remember at that point, to get a little personal here, at that point, I think I was more disturbed. My mind, not only was I more disturbed than I'd ever been in the Hare Krishna movement, I think I'd never been that disturbed in my life, even before I joined the Hare Krishna movement. I remember that I was in Mayapur and I was on the long building, which I watched as they built it under Prabhupada's direction, that long building in Mayapur. And something inside of me was just broken. And it changed my life. That experience changed my life. And of course, I remain loyal to Prabhupada and ISKCON because I'm not a fool. Well, I'm not a complete fool. But I think, in retrospect, it was, of course, it was Krishna's mercy. And I can see now what Krishna was doing. Because before that time, I was like super, super loyal, like whatever the GBC says. I was like, there was not any leader in ISKCON who was more orthodox and mainstream and just, whatever the GBC says, we have to. I mean, I don't think anyone in ISKCON was more that way than I was. I mean, I was one of the people that was, I would, in classes, I would say, if you're in the temple and you have to go to the store to buy some milk, wear your dhoti, because that's preaching. Actually, Bhakti Vigyan, he may be very happy to hear this, but actually, I was like, as they say in English, a real straight arrow. I was Mr. Dhoti. And Mr. Dhoti and everything. And it's interesting because if you talk about mental health, if we go for a moment into psychology, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that do not eat too much or too little, do not sleep too much or too little. But then Krishna says that this is a principle for all of your, you could say, human activities. And so just as we have certain physical needs, such as, sleeping enough or eating enough, we also have psychological needs. We have emotional needs. And one of the emotional needs we have, which Krishna says you cannot ignore, one of the emotional needs we have is to be accepted by a society. To be accepted by a society. And this gets down to very primitive psychology in the sense that, it's almost like animal psychology, you could say. Because if an animal, including a human animal, is not accepted by the group, that animal, probably won't survive. And so acceptance by, whether you're an animal or whether you're a human being, acceptance by the group is actually necessary for survival in most cases. And therefore, there's this very deep, you could say, primitive psychology of where we need to be accepted in a community or a society. And so in the Hare Krishna movement, my, you could say, emotional need was always fulfilled by just strongly identifying with ISKCON and its customs. And we were a world apart. We dressed differently. We ate differently. We walked and talked differently. We did everything differently. And actually, this separation, I think, has a very obvious psychological explanation. The explanation is that because we were rejected by mainstream society, we were rejected, we were seen as crazy. Most people thought, Hare Krishnas, they're nice, but they're kind of crazy. And therefore, I think that pushed us into this extreme embracing of Indian culture. So if you look at the Hare Krishna movement in India, I went to India for the first time in 1974 because Prabhupada ordered us to come for the Mayapur festival. And I was actually a little shocked. I mean, I don't mean like completely shocked, but I was really surprised to see that in India, the boundaries, the border between the Hare Krishna movement and society in general was much more fluid. There were not these boundaries. And I personally was not comfortable with it because I was not really interested in Indian culture. I knew that all of Indian culture is not Vedic. I think that's like, kind of absurd because, I mean, first of all, half of Indian culture, the external culture, like dress and food, comes from the Muslims for obvious reasons, which can be historically proved. But in any case, that really startled me because I was in the Hare Krishna movement in America, where these are just two different worlds. They're the Hare Krishnas and they're the Karmis and Gyanis and Yogis or Bhogi Yogis. And these two worlds don't mix at all. These two worlds. But in India, there were very few boundaries. And I was uncomfortable with it. I didn't feel comfortable with it. So what happened is, going back to this glorious reform, that when I saw that ISKCON was rejecting me, and I mean, to the point where I had to order my disciples not to go to the Mayapur festival, because when they went there, so many people, when they found out, oh, you're a disciple of Hridayananda Goswami, they would start insulting me and blaspheming me. There were so many rumors. I heard it probably like 5 different times. I heard rumors that I secretly was, secretly married or having illicit affairs, that I had children. I had illicit children that no one knew about. And my disciples would come to me and say, is it true? I mean, there are all these things going on. And when I went to Mayapur, all these junior devotees would come up to me and insult me and correct me, like, don't chant your japa like that. So it went to this crazy extreme. And then what finally kind of like broke me completely was Back to Godhead was going to publish the latest issue. And that was during the time when people actually read Back to Godhead. I mean, at least, Western devotees. On the cover, they had these 11 gurus, and it said, the people who almost destroyed ISKCON. And I was actually on the editorial board for Back to Godhead magazine, which means they sent me a copy of it before it was printed. And when I saw that, the people who, almost destroyed ISKCON, I thought, how am I going to preach in this movement? And so I had, and I called up the editor and told him, there's another side to it. He said, oh yeah, I understand. Then he printed it anyway. So at that point, I actually had a personal crisis. I was, and I remember very well where I was. I mean, I thought, it's almost like, let's say you have a room with an air conditioner, and the air conditioner is pulling in air from outside, and the air is poisonous. So your air conditioner is pulling poison into your room. And so my whole psychology at that point was, just fully surrendered to ISKCON, devotees, everything. And yet I realized that ISKCON for me had become completely toxic. It was poisonous. And that it was destroying my enthusiasm to preach. I was a preacher. I was a born preacher. When I joined the Hare Krishna movement, literally the day I moved into the temple, I organized a guest reception program because they didn't have one. And I saw that people were coming to the temple and no one was received. So I organized a guest reception program the day I moved into the temple. I was always a preacher. That's always what I did. And I realized I can't preach in this movement. And I thought, well, maybe I'll go. Maybe I thought if I go somewhere and I'd say open a center in some, and I had this huge zone and I just thought, forget that, because now, I'm a demon in ISKCON. So Harikesh did the opposite. He circled the wagons. He, put up walls. I made a personal decision that if I do that, I could do it, but I thought it's going to cause more harm to my disciples than good, because if I turn them against ISKCON, or if I turn them against the GVC, that will be even worse. So I thought I can't preach in this movement, because if I preach and I make some devotees, some sannyasi will come and tell them that I'm a bad person, that I'm this terrible person. And so I realized that for the first time in my life, my enthusiasm to preach was being destroyed. And I think also, frankly, I think I was on the road to a nervous breakdown. And so...
Can I interrupt you at this point?
I'm just going to complete this one little story.
Okay.
So at that point, because I'm a survivor, I had a great mother. And if you have a great mother, it means you survive. Somehow you survive. And so I realized that I had to change my life. And so I made a vow to Krishna that I will not allow anyone to abuse me. I will not allow anyone to do this to me. But the psychological effect of this was that ISKCON no longer was, I was still a member of ISKCON, but ISKCON was no longer giving me my basic human need to be part of a society, because I was practically like a demon in ISKCON. And so therefore, emotionally, you can't live like that. And at the same time, and then Krishna, I'll just tell the story very quickly because I think it's interesting. Krishna is so wonderful. Krishna is so wonderful that it's just like if you have a child and you see your child being treated unfairly, you give more love to your child. So at a time when, there's a, I don't know how to say it in Russian, but there's one of the Psalms in the Bible, the book of Psalms. And there's one which I love. It's so beautiful that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And so he like spreads a feast before me in the presence of my enemies. So when everyone was attacking me like that, Krishna began to shower all kinds of blessings on me. For example, I'd always wanted to fulfill Prabhupada's instruction and go back to college. And so suddenly Krishna ordered me, and anyway, it's a little esoteric, but Krishna definitely ordered me to go back to the university. And then my parents asked me, because they had become very wealthy. And so my parents asked me if I would accept this beautiful place in Beverly Hills. So I said, it wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a big house. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, but it was very beautiful. And so I said yes, because I had nowhere to go. And then they gave me this beautiful car. And then I was, not that to me, I didn't want a beautiful car, this luxury car. That's not what I wanted. To me, it was Krishna's love. Krishna's showering gifts. So I found myself living in Beverly Hills, driving in this beautiful car to one of the best universities in the world. And what I found at the university was, again, to me, it was Krishna's love that was important. And what I found at the university was everyone respected me. My professors, the other students, because, I was sort of the best student. And suddenly I was getting all this. It didn't make me want to become a non-devotee. But suddenly this, like I said, this very primitive, this very basic human need to have the support of a community and a society, it wasn't coming from ISKCON. ISKCON was just couldn't find enough ways to attack me. It was coming from these people, these innocent people. And so therefore, because that's where my support was coming from, I wanted to fit in. I mean, not in the sense of becoming a materialist or a mental speculator, but just being accepted as a normal person. It's interesting because Tamal Krishna Goswami had a very different experience. Because, I mean, I convinced Tamal Krishna to go back to college. And he was a great devotee. And so when we were talking, like, what university do you want to go to? I was sort of coaching him. And he said, he was very strong on the point, I want to go to Dallas because that's where my spiritual family is. That's where my community is. So when TKG went back to the university, he was in the middle of this big spiritual family. I didn't have that because for me, it was just like my zone was Brazil and people that were welcome me, but the way ISKCON was, it was too much for me. So So just to wrap this up, so that's when I started this whole Krishna West idea. Because it's different when you feel that ISKCON loves you and ISKCON appreciates you. And so you can go out on the street, and at least in America, people think you're crazy or a freak, but it doesn't matter because my emotional support is coming from the devotee community and they accept me. But when you're rejected by the devotee community, to go out there as a freak, which is what it is in America, basically, I couldn't do it. And I think, and I'm convinced I was right, that psychologically it was extremely unhealthy. It would have led to all kinds of crazy things. So, and that's how I sort of rediscovered the world and I regained my objectivity, and then the rest followed. Yes, Bhakti Vigyanan. That's fine.
So thank you. We have been talking already 1 hour and 40 plus minutes. Thank you for revealing your heart to all of us and being so personal in this description. So obviously, and it's kind of natural psychology, when the pendulum goes in one direction, then it goes in another direction. And, it's how the human psychology works. And, trying to correct one injustice or something wrong, you may do something which is even more, even a bigger injustice. So it's obvious that, we are conditioned souls who have some frailties and some problems. But what I want you to tell us, your personal observation, or, as Prabhupada says in the purport which we read, that this loyalty to Acharya, actually the saving grace. And all these people with all their, faults and problems and merits and all their good qualities, they were, trying to fulfill Prabhupada's vision.
Some of them.
Okay.
Because I was, if I could just mention one thing, then I'll turn it back to you. But just as among the gurus, they were different. So the most prominent leader of the reform, who was from Canada, became soon after that a meat-eating atheist. So, and then other people like Rabindra obviously were loyal to Prabhupada. So I think that what we have to see is that power corrupts. And that just as the power of being a guru corrupted some people, and the power of being the
reformer.
Reformer, the punisher of gurus, it definitely destroyed some people's lives because they also became, so on both sides, there was good and bad. But I never had any problem being loyal to Prabhupada or Krishna or ISKCON, because if you're loyal to Prabhupada, you're loyal to ISKCON. You cannot be loyal to Prabhupada and not loyal to ISKCON, as Prabhupada himself stated. And ultimately, I just wanted to just one more sentence, that this whole thing, you know, we were all young, we were all inexperienced, but this whole thing, ultimately, I'm convinced now that Krishna put me through all this for many reasons, obviously. But one reason was because he really wanted me to recover my objectivity. When everything was going well for me in ISKCON, it was impossible for me to be objective about ISKCON. At one level, I mean, some things, of course, you can be objective about, but I could not really understand how the world was seeing us, at least in America. And so I think Krishna did all these things so I could become a loyal member of ISKCON, but at the same time, very objective about it. And it's based on this objectivity that I made certain decisions about how I think we should spread Krishna consciousness. But go ahead.
I remember personally those times. You know, I moved to Sweden in 86 or 87. And I remember a tremendous spirit of self-surrender, self-sacrifice, which was there. And there was a lot of Western disciples of Harikesh Maharaj at that time, and not only of Harikesh Maharaj, because there were Sachinand Maharaj, Krishna Kshetra Prabhu at that time, and Smita Krishna Maharaj, they were also initiating at that time. So what I want to say is that for me, it was one of the best times in the whole of my spiritual career, because of this pure spirit of self-sacrifice, because of some sort of innocence, which was to a greater extent destroyed due to certain unfortunate events. But what I think is a big mistake now. We are trying to look back in this era, and we don't understand and don't remember this very pure and selfless spirit of sacrifice, which is the foundation of ISKCON. And Prabhupada, somehow or other, he instilled this spirit in his disciples, and his disciples were capable of instilling the same spirit in their disciples. In my humble opinion, or maybe not so humble, that's the success, the key for success which ISKCON had, despite of all these problems. This pure spirit of surrender and self-sacrifice was very much there. And unfortunately, it's not that much still there. So I think that's a very big loss, you know, which we should perhaps try to recover on some other grounds. But I just want other people to ask questions. There is only 10 minutes left for our time.
Oh, yes.
If
Sorry.
you want to give some conclusion, would be greatly appreciated, because despite of all the problems, ISKCON survived. And I would say, you know, in many regards, is stronger and definitely much more, you know, expanded over the time. But I think the foundation of this is this spirit which Prabhupada was expertly instilling in his disciples, and his disciples were transmitting it to their disciples. And I'm very grateful to all of you, knowing how much sacrifice you did for Prabhupada, and how much you did for him to spread this movement. your contribution is there. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that your great contribution is there. And it's very unfortunate that some people didn't appreciate your contribution justly. I don't know. I'm not in a position to apologize for them, but I really want to beg forgiveness from you if anything is improper was coming from this corner of the world. But I
No, you are I see you as a great saint. And no, I've always, you're a very Krishna conscious person. You've always been a good friend to me. And we're very enthusiastic about your helping with the Bhaktivedanta Institute.
Anyway, if you want to make some conclusion, please make. If not, we can.
Questions. We can have, if anyone has a question.
And besides that, if I may add a few words from my side, Hridayananda Maharaj and Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, thank you very much for this very meaningful, profound discussion, which made a personal story of Hridayananda Maharaj into a very important lesson for all of us, because if we don't remember our history, we won't have any future. I apologize if I sound trite by saying that, but it is. That's what it is. And this whole cancel culture, which is there in the West, is also spreading to ISKCON, because devotees sometimes tend to be either oblivious about our history with all its failures and successes, and also because of that, they tend to repeat the same mistakes over and over again, maybe on a lesser scale. And my humble request is, first of all, my deep appreciation, my gratitude to you for sharing this story, personal story, which is, of course, a significant part of ISKCON history at its very crucial juncture. But also, I would like to ask you, Maharaj, if you could kindly give some message to the devotees who are present today. We have 60 plus devotees who are leaders. Some of them are administrative leaders. Many of them are spiritual leaders, who also guide and counsel many devotees, looking up to them, helping them come closer to Srila Prabhupada and Krishna. And some of them will probably become future gurus, GBCs, sannyasis. And based on your experience and based on what you have extracted from the history of ISKCON, if you could kindly give them some message, some guidance as to what they should embrace wholeheartedly and base their spiritual responsibility on, and what they should avoid by all means. Because this is a Bhaktivedanta University which we want to turn into a place where devotees actually learn from the previous generation of those who have already gone through a lot of experiential learning. So my humble request, Maharaj, in answering these questions, if you could kindly also share these words of wisdom, cautionary wisdom or encouraging wisdom. Wisdom is wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. Prabhupada, of course, used to say that we have to combine philosophy with religion. And I think that's really what we need to be. It's, if we go too far on the religious side, Prabhupada said it becomes fanaticism or sentimentalism. And if we simply become mundane scholars, then we lose our soul. And so what ISKCON really, I think what the world will accept from ISKCON is a spiritual science. Not another religion, but a spiritual science. So, and I think the way to stay strong is to always care about Prabhupada's mission. Prabhupada, I remember, all the time when I was with Prabhupada, the most striking thing is that, of course, his purity. And his purity manifested as he was always in his mission. He could be joking, he could be eating, he could be whatever he was doing, walking. he was always in his mission. And of course, Krishna says that, what is that? Yuktahara viharasya. That you should be moderate in these activities. And one of the things you should do moderately is vihara, which means recreation, relaxing, joking. Prabhupada was very funny. And it took me a while because when I used to go to see him, he was all, I was very young and, oh my God, I'm in the presence of Prabhupada. But when I look back on it, he was joking with me a lot. And of course, he was very serious. He was the most serious person, but he was very jovial. But even then, he was always Krishna conscious. He was always thinking of Krishna. And to think of Krishna is to think of the fallen souls. You cannot, now, of course, there are people in ISKCON who kind of pride themselves on being gopiologists and so on. And of course, we care about Radha and Krishna, the gopis. That's our perfection. But still, Prabhupada, as a fully Krishna conscious person, as someone who was seeing Krishna, he was what's the word, modest. His personal ecstasies were his personal ecstasies. But he was always conscious of the mission. And so to me, to be a good leader, so and to be something else Prabhupada told me, which I think is very important for future leaders or present leaders. When Prabhupada first made me GBC of Latin America, I was like, I was 25 years old. So I became a GBC in ISKCON several years before my brain was fully formed, according to modern neurological studies. So I was down there and I was very strict, very strict sannyasi and all. And so when I went down there, there were two godbrothers of mine who were leaders down there, because Latin America, to go to Latin America back then was like going to the moon or to, maybe Neptune or something. I mean, no one ever went there. So they were alone and they were doing kind of crazy things. So I went down there and I was, you can't do this. This is bogus. And so they left Latin America because, they were doing crazy things. But when Prabhupada came to Mexico, those two leaders were, kind of angry at me. And they were both actually senior to me. They'd been in the movement a little longer. And so they both came to see Prabhupada to complain about me. So we were in Prabhupada's room and they were making their complaints. And I knew the story, and I tried to defend myself. And Prabhupada just said no, keep quiet. He let them talk. So when they left the room, I said to Prabhupada, there's another side. And Prabhupada said, I know. But then he said to me words that I never forgot. He said, they are my disciples. Do not break them. They are my disciples. Do not break them. And that was, I never forgot that. That even if you have power, even if you're a leader, you can't destroy other people. You can't destroy their spiritual lives. And Prabhupada would always fight. If someone was not loyal to Prabhupada, then it was like, have a great life. But if someone was somehow loyal to Prabhupada, he would find some way. He would find some way to save them or to at least keep them connected. So I think a leader has to be rational. There really is a danger. Prabhupada actually talked about this. He talked about and when I mentioned it very briefly, the UK National Council, was very alarmed and, was wondering if I should ever be allowed in the UK because I repeated something Prabhupada said. They didn't know I was repeating Prabhupada. But anyway, that's a different topic. So, but what Prabhupada said was, he was very concerned. He said, because we know Prabhupada came to establish a Brahminical order. Prabhupada came to recreate the Brahman Varna. The world depends on the presence of qualified Brahmins in the world. The world depends on that. And that's why in the Bhagavatam, Krishna gives so much emphasis to Vaishnava Brahmins. So Prabhupada came to reconstitute the Brahmin order. And yet he saw that so many people were joining the movement who were Sudras. And so, it's not that by nature, they're Vaishnavas, they're glorious, but their nature. And so Prabhupada was concerned about this. Prabhupada was extremely aware of social class, not in terms of who could be a devotee, but in terms of how to actually build a successful movement. So therefore, Prabhupada emphasized so much that we have to preach to intelligent people. It's not that the souls of people in intelligent bodies are more important than souls in other bodies. But if we get intelligent people, if we can create a strong Brahmin class, we'll get everybody else. But if we don't, then we'll ultimately lose everyone. And ultimately, Shudras will inherit this movement. So these are, this is obviously not politically correct, as most true things aren't. But so Prabhupada was very concerned. Prabhupada was very concerned for the future, that we actually get people who are qualified to be Brahmins, because the Brahmins are the ones that save the world. And the Kshatriyas, of course, provide, security and safety so that the Brahmins can do their work. And so the only way we can attract intelligent people to this movement is if we're intelligent. And that was Prabhupada's instruction. That's why I insist on this, which makes me very popular among many other leaders, but I'm joking. I insist on this, that somehow or other, we have to make a rational presentation of Krishna consciousness, because it is a spiritual science. And of course, there's room for argument. Some of us are on VAST, that academic conference, and, and that's what it's for. It's very healthy. We discuss things and we learn from each other and so on. But that's why presenting Krishna consciousness as a spiritual science, we are not going to culturally colonize the Western world, or frankly, in my view, Russia. We are not going to culturally colonize these countries. And by culture, I mean external culture. The fact is that if you study history, culture is like water. It flows down, not up. Water doesn't go up. And so there are certain cultures in the world which social scientists would call prestige cultures, in the sense that they have a lot of influence. Obviously, American example. Another example is England. This is called soft power. Hard power means, guns and bombs and things like that. Soft power means cultural influence. So look at the United Kingdom or England, for example. Harry Potter. Everyone knows Harry Potter. Everyone knows the Beatles. And of course, if you're, over 70, the Rolling Stones, all these musical groups. And Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, the Beatles. And so England has cultural power. It has soft power far beyond the number of people. If you think, for example, like, where are the German Beatles? Or where's the French Harry Potter? So even in Europe, so what I mean to say is that there are certain cultures in the world, and of course there's America, God help us, with Hollywood and all these things. And so there are certain cultures that just have influence. It doesn't mean they are more civilized. It doesn't mean they have a better culture. It's just an objective fact of power. I can say, frankly, I appreciate some things about Russia, which I think America could learn. And I think maybe, Russia could learn certain things of America. People can, but still the fact is that certain cultures, and you can measure this, you can scientifically measure this, certain cultures have great influence. And so the cultural influence, it goes from places that are considered to be more successful or richer or sexier, or, whatever you want to say. And it goes to other places. So India at the present time, despite ISKCON dreaming, has very little cultural influence. One way you can measure this is by, and I've written papers about this, for example, we can look at statistics of international tourism. Yeah, Madam Mohan.
Maharaj, I beg your pardon. I'm afraid that we'll launch into another very thrilling and interesting session with you on the.
Okay, but I'll stop. Okay, I'll stop that topic.
If you don't mind,
yeah.
We do have questions also from devotees.
Okay, no, you're right. You're
what
right.
I would suggest.
I'll end that topic with one sentence. Just with one sentence. I promise I will. I'll stop. And that is that. That's why, and I'm not telling you what to do in Russia. I don't know Russia that well. I mean, I think it's a very, very interesting country. I've studied Russian history actually quite a lot because I find it very interesting. And so you're intelligent, but we have to find a way to attract intelligent people and to present Krishna consciousness in a way that strikes people as rational, intelligent, and a spiritual science. So, sorry, go ahead, questions.
I'm doing this. What I would suggest, there is a lot of questions. They're all very interesting, and people actually expressing their gratitude and appreciation of what they heard. Very moving questions and reviews of the talk. But because we're already talking more than 2 hours, I suggest that we translate these questions and send it to you, and you either record the answers to these questions, or if you wish, write the answers to these questions, because I don't think we can go into it now. What do you think, Mohan Prabhu? I think that would be better, because they're all very important questions.
Yeah, and my apologies for those who ask questions, because I really would like to address your questions, even though I'm not fluent in Russian.
We can help you with this, no problem.
I know, but I really am grateful to Bhakti Vijnana and Goswami and Madan Mohan, because again, Russia is a very, very interesting country. It's a very important country. And I feel very fortunate that I'm able to spend a little time with you.
One concluding word from my side, Maharaj, and it would be unfair to not to mention Bhakti Brahmatirtha Prabhu's role and presence in your life, because you did mention him a lot as a permanent support from.
Oh yes, yeah, he's been yeah.
And that by itself speaks volumes about the importance of having friends in Krishna consciousness, especially for leaders, because leaders do tend to be self-isolated and in their own circles of influence. And if you don't mind, Bhakti Vijnana Maharaj and Hridayananda Maharaj, may I, with your permission, ask Brahmatirtha Prabhu to say a few words about how important friendship is for all of us, especially for those who are leaders, and they do require that emotional, spiritual, and friendly support. And
Prabhu just wrote that he has to rush somewhere else.
Well, I have a few minutes. I have a city commission meeting I have to dash.
But if I have your permission for asking him to do that, because it would be.
Oh, I think that's a great idea. I feel ashamed of myself that I didn't ask him to do it. Yeah. But yeah, it's a great idea.
You spoke about his friendship throughout, and
yeah, Brahmatirtha, I'll just say one thing, that he has been, I mean, more than a friend, a real brother, a friend, and he's gone through so many battles with me, and yeah, I think he deserves a tremendous amount of credit for whatever I've been able to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Battle's not always on the same side, but you know how life is. So anyway, there's an American song that I won't play, but it goes something like, people who like people are the luckiest people in the world. A very famous American singer recorded it. And it is very applicable. The Upadeshamrita, which is more or less an internal book for the movement from Rupa Goswami tells us how to have relations. And if we don't, the big missing factor that I see from my ISKCON Resolve work is trust. And when devotees lose trust, that we really have to work hard to get it back. So in ISKCON Resolve, and I know we're active in Russia through Braja Bihari, we try to help develop these relationships and restore trust, because Prabhupada's instructions to us were to work together with intelligence and organization. And to have any organization work, not everything can be in rules and regulations. There has to be a certain level of trust. In the 1980s, that trust broke in various ways. Some of it that would be expected. As Maharaj mentioned, none of us knew how to grieve very much. I had lost one grandmother in my whole life, the only death I knew. So we didn't know how to grieve very well for Prabhupada. At the same time, as Maharaj points out, when the 1980s occurred, the Gaudiya-math, we had some real friends in the Gaudiya-math who helped us a lot, especially Prabhupada had some good sons and one very bad son who tried to sue ISKCON and say that all the ISKCON properties in India belong to him because he is a son of Prabhupada. So we had some of Prabhupada's god brothers and god nephews from the Gaudiya-math who helped us a lot. And we had some who saw an opportunity to take advantage of our neophyte stage. And then some, I would say like Srila Swami, who are really true well-wishers of the movement, but viewed things differently than Prabhupada and had a different view on how to continue a movement. He was the one that basically began the zonal Acharya system. So I've discussed this many times with Hridayananda Raj, and his approach has been with people like Prabhupada's god brothers. And the approach I witnessed that Prabhupada told us to do was be friendly at a distance. In other words, generally don't reveal our mind too much. Sometimes we may take advice on some technical details, such as how to conduct a funeral for Prabhupada was one obvious one, because we had no idea how. And even at Prabhupada's funeral, one of his god brothers who was speaking made these amazing words that really cemented to me that I should never get too close to them. And the words he said was, he praised Prabhupada for what he did. And then he said the most amazing words, any of us could have done it. And I won't even mention his name, he's long gone, because any of us could have done it. That means that there was some kind of envy of Prabhupada. But if any of you could have done it, but you didn't, and Prabhupada did do what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted. So the 80s was a tough time, but it was a wonderful time. The movement expanded way beyond what it was when Prabhupada even left. It kept moving and moving, expanding, and more books being distributed, and temples opening, and devotees being made. But at the same time, our immaturity sometimes caught up with us. And we hadn't cultivated, we're so busy working that to answer Madan Mohan's very, very important question, and you're all lucky to have Madan Mohan in Russia, because I've read some of his papers, and he'll hate me for saying this, but he is a brilliant scholar and a Vaishnav gentleman. And we need more of those. So you're very fortunate to have that resource in Russia. But we we're so busy spreading the movement, we didn't necessarily have all the Vaishnava relationships we needed to have what we call in the West, the emotional bank account to deal with all the difficulties. And one of the symptoms of sometimes being not mature enough is to be overly harsh with each other. As Hridayananda said, even though he was correct in his dealings with these wayward devotees, Prabhupada reminded him, but don't break them. And at the same time, some devotees tried to break even our zonal acharyas. Some of them had become somewhat, it was too much for them to assume the prophet adoration and distinction of the position. For others, they did okay with it. Like Hridayananda, Jayapataka Swami are still with us from the original. They did fine with it. It was difficult time. I remember so many talks Hridayananda and I had, how difficult it was to sit. And one time in those days, Maharaj used to get, it's typical on the birthday, a lot of donations from disciples. It was typical then. So one time I was standing next to Maharaj. I was collecting the checks in a little bag. This is the 80s. And Maharaj turned to me very sincerely and said, how difficult it is to sit on a Vyasasana and have to hear these people saying all these praise, which he said, it doesn't apply to me, but they're saying all these things. What do I do? And I turned to him and said, because we were collecting a lot of money that day, I said, you can cry all the way to the bank. So to be put on a Vyasasana and have to hear all this is very, very difficult matter. But those who were able to do it and survive, my hat's off to them. Those who were able to do it and it was a little too much, my respect for you for trying. I didn't try, I never could. So we have to be a little more liberal with each other. There's a saying in the West, I hope it translates to Russian well, but the saying is benefit of the doubt. And by benefit of the doubt, that means that when there's some difficulty, assume the best, not the worst. And if we deal with each other that way, we're going to develop deeper loving relationships. That doesn't mean we're naive or stupid. And when something terrible is going on, when there's an abusive situation, especially those of us who have a little Kshatriya sense, we have to speak up, we have to deal with it. We can't let devotees be abused or hurt or whatever goes on. But generally, when there's difficulty with our god brothers, god nephews, god nieces, god uncles, aunts, whatever it is, if we give the benefit of the doubt, whether they're sincerely trying, though I might disagree, we're going to then be in the mood of Rupa Goswami in the Upadeshamrita and able to cultivate deeper relationships. I had wished that, for example, the Committee of 50, they had a real mission. There was a lot of discord in the movement, a lot of discontent. And when there's a lot of discontent, we need to deal with it. It was something that needed to be faced. Unfortunately, they overdealt with it. They dealt with it, in my opinion, I was a witness to all this, in too harsh ways. We see a pendulum swings very widely. So it goes from one side to the other. But where the place we want the pendulum is in the middle. So there were some great excesses on one side with some of the leaders of the movement then. And then when it was dealt with excesses on the other side. So you have a wildly swinging pendulum. And better the pendulum not move so far, and then we'll be in the middle where we're supposed to be. So that's all I just wanted to address the two issues, the issue that my friend, His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Swami, asked us to talk about today, and I wanted to address the issue with Madan Mohan asked me to speak on. I hope that adds a little bit of context to what we're talking about. And finally, Hridayananda, we speak probably 5 times a week for 40 years. And I can attest to, I haven't met anybody in the movement who understands, especially from a philosophical point of view and from a Prabhupada's intent of how the movement should move on, that managerial aspect. Hardly anybody who has as much insight as he has. So for those who would like to know more about the underpinnings, the philosophical basis of what was discussed today, there's a few papers that Maharaj has published, one called Understanding Prabhupada, and the other titles slip my mind, but there's several papers. The papers are on his website, or you can write me, or you can contact me through Madan Mohan or Bhaktivedanta Swami. And I urge you all to be deep thinkers, because that's what Prabhupada wanted from us. And my experience with the Russians, because wearing my other hat as the director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies, we work closely with the wonderful Russian devotees. 4 or 5 came to our conference 2 years ago. And the one quality I find with all the Russians I deal with is they are thinkers. As Socrates says, the unexplored mind, I'm getting it mixed up how he says it, is the unexplored life is not worth living. I'm paraphrasing. So the Russians I find are deep thinkers. So I urge you all, keep on thinking. And thank you for the opportunity to participate. It's an honor and a pleasure. Hare Krishna.
Anyway, so thank you all very much. Thank you, Madan Mohan, for your insertion. Thank you, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, for your addendum to the talk. It was very relevant. And of course, thank you, Hridayananda Maharaj, for being so personal and so open. And I'm sure your talk had a very deep impression on many people. And I really hope that you will answer all their questions which they have. We will translate it and give it to you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. It's like I said, it's I'm very grateful, and I'm really happy that I have a chance to spend a little time with the Russian leaders. And I wish you all great success in your service to our mission.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. So with these words, we will adjourn our session today. Thank you.
Okay.
I hope
Hare Krishna.
time. Hare Krishna.
Spasibo, Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.